A man who had been single for 30 years, he decided to marry a vegetable. He doesn't mind even if he's unconscious. But when Mark heard about David's idea, his first thought was that he was crazy. How could anyone want to marry a vegetable who was not sure when he would wake up? And it was only David's wishful thinking. She hadn't given her consent. David then said, over the years he had spent time with her. It was like most couples in the world. He really liked her. When persuasion failed, Mark drove off in anger. The two of them ended up having a bad time. Soon after, an accident happened. This day, the nursemaid noticed Jean's menstrual cycle was delayed. After examining her, it was discovered that she was 3 months pregnant. An investigation was launched. It was discovered that David had secretly altered the care records to conceal the pregnancy. The evidence was conclusive and David was arrested and sent to prison. 8 months later, Mark, who was traveling abroad, read in the newspaper news of his girlfriend's death. He rushed to the hospital by phone to find out what had happened to David. He was surprised to learn that he had been arrested and sent to prison. David was surprised to see Mark. His time in prison had been like a year for him. No one would give him any information about her. David had to ask Mark for help in finding out how she was doing. To give his friend some comfort, Mark had to agree. To do so, he stayed in David's house, looking at the huge picture on the wall. Mark wondered at the depth of David's affection, and at the same time he thought it was a foolish way. It was a foolish way to show his love. He looked outside the house, and found Jean sitting in the dance studio. Mark couldn't believe his eyes. He kept comparing his eyes to the pictures on the wall. He finally confirmed that he was right. Jean had miraculously regained consciousness after giving birth to a dead baby. But what had happened during her coma? She didn't remember anything. David was not present in her memory, and the lawyer was concerned about David's unstable mental state, so she never told her she was awake. After much deliberation, Mark decided to break the news to David, but when he arrived at the prison, he received a note from David. As far as David was concerned, living in a world without her, every minute was painful. He had secretly saved up a lot of pills. He was ready to end his life. Perhaps in another world, he'll be able to reunite with her. After reading David's suicide note, Mark couldn't stop crying. Life is full of regrets. Just a little bit. The two of them were separated forever. Mark stood in front of David's curtain, telling him that Jean was sober, and put the hairpin in his pocket. He hoped they will always be with David. This is the end of an unspeakable love affair. The film shows David's love for Jean at the core of his being, but unfortunately, he doesn't get the chance to say it to his face. Instead, he takes a perverse approach. The distance between them grows wider and wider, and Jean will never know. There was someone who loved him so passionately and openly.